Achen, Democracy for Realists, Why Elections Do Not Produce Responsive Government, Princeton Studies in Political Behavior, 1. Dive into the captivating book Summary of Democracy for Realists as it challenges the traditional populist view of democracy and sheds light on the reality of American politics. Discover how voters are often not driven by ideology, but by group identity, with party loyalty often outweighing personal views. Uncover the factors that shape voter behavior, the impact of group affiliations, and the ways in which democracy is manipulated by elites and corporations. By recognizing the influence of these non-idealistic forces, we open the door to understanding how the democratic process could be fine-tuned to foster a more egalitarian society.
The flawed populist view of democracy. The populist view of democracy is the widely held belief that ordinary citizens should govern and determine government policies. However, this idealistic view breaks down when confronted with reality and research. The electoral system does not ensure that elected representatives obey the will of their constituents, and politicians are often able to follow their own agendas. Public opinion is frequently ill-informed, and citizens lack the interest and motivation to learn about and engage in politics. Direct democracy processes and the belief in the populist theory of democracy can also be manipulated by elites for their own ends. Despite its virtues, democracy is not infallible, and it is crucial to recognize its limitations and flaws to improve its functioning. Rethinking Democracy. In the 1960s, political theorists struggled to reconcile the logical problems created by the mathematical models of politics constructed by economists in the 1950s. The spatial model of politics created elegant conclusions regarding democracy until theorists extended it to multiple dimensions and realized the impossibility of satisfying the majority with one political platform. These discoveries led to the development of retrospective voting, which requires voters only to consider how incumbents have performed in the past. However, studies showed that this theory also fails in practice, as voters do not base their choices on rational assessments of incumbents' job performance. In essence, democracy remained a justifying political ideology, despite the profound reassessments of how it works. The role of identity theory in understanding voter behavior. Political theorists should consider the factors that truly drive voter behavior, which identity theory explains in a more effective way. Most American voters take their political ideas and loyalties from the groups they identify with. Group identification is more emotional than rational, shaping an individual's political leanings. People develop a sense of belonging to a social class, ethnicity, political party, religion, or other groups, and then embrace the values and beliefs that provide a basis for belonging to that group. Therefore, social group identities play a more critical role than ideology in choosing a political party. Historical data analysis shows that identity is central to understanding political shifts over time. For instance, support for President Franklin Roosevelt's policies depended mostly on voters' ethnic identification in the 1930s. Conversely, voters' views on John F. Kennedy's campaign and presidency varied mostly based on their feelings towards Catholicism in the 1960s. The abortion issue triggered party realignments in the 1980s and 1990s, leading to women abandoning the Republican Party at much higher rates than men because the issue primarily related to women's gender identity. In contrast, men tended to change views on abortion to match their party's position instead of switching parties. The paradox of the informed voter. Most voters lack knowledge about policymaking and make decisions based on group loyalty rather than ideology or logical arguments. Even with improved access to education and information, voters often vote against their own interests and respond differently to survey questions depending on how they are phrased. This paradox highlights the importance of bridging the gap between policymakers and the public by presenting information effectively and avoiding assumptions about voter knowledge and preferences. The influence of party allegiance. Political beliefs typically stem from one's party allegiance, shaped by social identities, attachments, and often inaccurate perceptions. According to some political scientists, partisanship can serve as a significant basis for democracy. People tend to choose parties that represent their interests and views. However, most people absorb their political beliefs and opinions from the candidates and parties they choose to support. Even when voters' views oscillate, their loyalty to the party persists, diverging from their personal perspectives and beliefs. The ideology appears to be, at best, a byproduct of more fundamental partisan and group loyalties for most ordinary citizens. Party members tend to misconceive candidates and parties' positions and records to maintain their loyalty. For instance, in 1996, researchers asked voters about the change in the U.S. federal budget deficit during Bill Clinton's first term, a topic heavily featured in the media. Fewer than 8% of Democrats and 4% of Republicans knew that the deficit had significantly decreased. Among Republicans, nearly 23% believed that it had increased significantly. So how do people form their party allegiances? They often inherit loyalties from their parents and never stray. But more importantly, party allegiances are shaped by social identities and attachments, and frequently, an accurate perception of how a party has benefited them. The dark side of retrospective voting. Retrospective voting theory suggests that people vote based on their leaders' past performance, primarily by considering their economic standing. However, research shows that this type of voting fails since people's hindsight only considers the 6 months before an election and does not reflect their well-being accurately. Furthermore, voters' biases based on short-term income growth can lead to disastrous results, like cuts to public services. This summary also highlights other factors that influence voter behavior, such as weather conditions, and people's identities. Most importantly, irrational factors in elections reduce incumbents' incentives to work hard for voters, and myopic retrospection encourages short-term-oriented policies. The influence of irrelevant factors. The outcome of elections is not always a reflection of the candidates' campaigns or extremist views. Rather, it is often the result of the limited perspective of voters. The electorate's preferences correlate only to a small degree with voting outcomes in both U.S. congressional and presidential elections. Even the voting records of elected officials do not always reflect their constituents' preferences. The so-called independent voters are often the ones who swing election outcomes, even though they tend to behave like partisans, with poorer knowledge of issues and candidates than their party-loyal counterparts. The folk theory of elections that props up elite rule is unrepresentative, benefiting elite interests over wider societal interests. The main purpose of election campaigns is to remind voters of their partisan affiliations, linking group identities to specific parties and candidates. However, focusing on swing voters, and allowing non-members greater access to party decisions, may decrease a party's ability to accurately represent its voting base. Making American democracy more democratic. Democratic elections are fundamental for legitimate leaders and planned changes in leadership. However, America's democracy is not perfect due to powerful corporations and ethnic groups having an impact on the government. To create a more egalitarian democracy, wealth needs to have less influence in policy making, and identity must be given attention.
Democracy for Realists offers an enlightening perspective on the way American democracy really functions, highlighting the significance of group identity, rather than ideology, in shaping voter behavior and political affiliations. Debunking the Populist View. The book draws attention to the limitations of voter retrospect and the manipulation of the electoral system by elites and corporations. Crucially, this summary has illuminated the need for a re-evaluation of our views on democracy, to focus on reducing wealth's impact on policymaking and acknowledging the role of identity in order to create more responsive and representative democratic processes.